There was once a time when the valley of Makkah almost died. The caravans still crossed the deserts of Arabia. The Kaaba still stood between the mountains. But the water was gone. Zamzam had disappeared. The same blessed spring that saved Hajar and Ismail, the same water that gave life to Makkah for centuries, vanished beneath the earth as if it had never existed, and no one could find it. Some believed it was punishment. Others whispered that the sacred valley had been cursed by the corruption of men. But hidden beneath the sands of Makkah was a secret buried so deeply that generations passed before the truth was uncovered. So what really happened to Zamzam? Who buried the well of Ibrahim? Why did the descendants of Ismail lose control of the Kaaba? And how did greed, power, and idol worship slowly transform the holiest sanctuary in Arabia? Tonight, we uncover one of the darkest, forgotten chapters in the history of Makkah. Long before Makkah became the city known to the world today, it was only a silent valley surrounded by dark mountains and burning desert. There were no gardens there, no rivers, no markets, no kingdom. Only sand, stone, and silence. Yet in that silence, Allah had placed something that would change the destiny of Arabia forever: Zamzam. The water that first appeared for Hajar alayhi salam and her infant son Ismail alayhi salam became the reason life could exist in that barren place. A mother had run between Safa and Marwa, searching desperately for help, and Allah answered her struggle with a spring from beneath the earth. From that moment, the empty valley was no longer empty. Water brought life, life brought people, and people brought history. The tribe of Jurhum eventually settled near Hajar and Ismail. Ismail grew among them, learned their language, married from them, and became deeply connected to the land of Makkah. Later, with his father Ibrahim alayhi salam, he helped raise the foundations of the Kaaba, the house built for the worship of Allah alone. For a time, the valley carried the purity of Tawheed. People came to the Kaaba remembering the way of Ibrahim. They performed pilgrimage, they honored the sacred house, they drank from Zamzam and saw it not merely as water, but as a sign of Allah's mercy. But history is rarely protected by one generation alone. After Ismail alayhi salam passed away, responsibility for the sacred house gradually moved through his descendants. His sons carried his legacy, but they were few in number compared to the larger tribes around Makkah. And slowly, power began to shift. The tribe of Jurhum, already strong in the region, became increasingly influential in the affairs of the city. They were connected to Ismail through marriage and settlement, and for many years they remained close to the sacred house. At first, this did not appear dangerous. The people still remembered Ibrahim. The Kaaba still stood as a symbol of worship. Zamzam still flowed. The valley still welcomed pilgrims and travelers, but beneath the surface, a question was beginning to form. Who would control the house of Allah? The answer to that question would shape the future of Makkah. As generations passed, many descendants of Ismail spread beyond the valley, seeking livelihood and space among other tribes. Some remained near the Kaaba, respected for their lineage and religious connection, but real political authority increasingly rested in the hands of Jurhum, and this was the beginning of a quiet imbalance. The spiritual legacy of Ismail remained honored, but administrative power belonged to others. At first, Jurhum served the visitors of the Kaaba with dignity. Travelers arrived exhausted from the desert and found safety near Zamzam. Pilgrims came from distant tribes and were given water. The sacred valley became a place of shelter. But Makkah was not only sacred, it was also strategically placed. Across Arabia, trade routes moved like veins through the desert. Caravans traveled from the south carrying incense, leather, spices, and precious goods. Others came from the north, returning from markets connected to Syria, Petra, Gaza, and the wider world. These journeys were dangerous. The desert could kill a man through thirst before any enemy touched him. Robbers waited along remote paths. Camels collapsed under the heat. Every caravan needed safe stops, and few places mattered more than Makkah. Because Makkah had Zamzam, other wells across Arabia could dry with the seasons. Some were bitter, some were weak. Some vanished when rain failed. But Zamzam was different. It gave Makkah a rare strength. Caravans stopped there to rest. Merchants watered their animals. Travelers slept under the protection of the sacred precinct. Goods from different lands entered the valley, and slowly, markets began to form. Where water gathers people, trade follows. And where trade grows, wealth appears. For Jurhum, the sacred valley became more than a responsibility. It became an opportunity. At first, the change was subtle, a small demand here, a fee there, a claim that payment was needed to maintain order, a reminder that protection did not come without cost. Most travelers did not resist. They needed water, they needed safety. They needed access to the roads passing through Makkah. And so the house of Allah slowly became surrounded by commerce. Not ordinary trade alone, but control, taxation, and advantage. That decision would soon be tested, because wealth does not only fill the hand, it also tests the heart. As Jurhum grew richer, their attitude began to change. The humility of service weakened. The sacred duty of caring for pilgrims became mixed with arrogance. What had once been an honor slowly became a source of profit. Pilgrims who came thirsty were treated less like guests of Allah and more like customers. Travelers were pressured, the weak were ignored. The people who had been entrusted with Zamzam began acting as if the water belonged to them. But Zamzam had never belonged to any tribe. It was a mercy from Allah. And when sacred things are treated as private property, corruption does not remain hidden for long. Around this same period, reports mention another tribe connected to the affairs of Makkah, Khuzā, along with related tribal groups in the surrounding region. Tensions began to rise between tribes over authority, trade, and control of the sanctuary. For years, the power of Jurhum remained strong, but their reputation was changing. The surrounding tribes watched their behavior with growing anger. They saw greed around the Kaaba. They heard complaints from pilgrims. They saw the sacred valley becoming a place where power mattered more than piety. Still, no tribe could easily challenge Jurhum alone. They had numbers, they had wealth, they had position, and most importantly, they controlled the water. But the decline of Jurhum was not caused only by politics. It was also moral. Early historical reports speak of corruption spreading among them, including violations of the sanctity of the Kaaba itself. Among the most famous reports is the story of Isaf and Naila, two people whose names would later become a warning in the memory of Arabia. According to these reports, they committed a grave act of immorality in the sacred precinct. The story was remembered as a sign of how far reverence for the Kaaba had fallen in that age. What matters most is not the sensational detail, it is the meaning. The house built by Ibrahim for Tawheed was no longer being honored as it should have been. The sacred had become familiar. And once people become too comfortable around sacred things, disrespect can grow quietly. What began as negligence became corruption. What began as corruption became desecration. And yet, the people continued living as though nothing would change. But change was already approaching. The tribes outside Makkah began to unite against Jurhum. Khuzā and their allies saw an opportunity to remove them from power. The anger that had built for generations finally turned into open conflict. Battles broke out around the valley. The same land that had once been a place of safety now heard the sound of tribal war. Jurhum fought to keep control. Their enemies fought to take it away. For days, the future of Makkah hung in uncertainty. But slowly, Jurhum began to weaken. Their strength was fading, their enemies pressed closer, and then their leaders faced a final choice. If they could no longer rule Makkah, would they allow another tribe to inherit its greatest blessing? The answer would change the city for centuries. Under the cover of darkness, as defeat became impossible to deny, the leaders of Jurhum made a desperate decision. They would leave Makkah, but before leaving, they would take revenge on the valley itself. They gathered treasures connected with the Kaaba. Reports mentioned golden gazelles, weapons, and valuables remembered in the old traditions, and they lowered them into the well of Zamzam. Then they buried it. Stone, earth, sand, layer after layer. The well that had sustained Makkah from the time of Hajar and Ismail was sealed until its place disappeared from sight. When Jurhum left the valley, Zamzam vanished with them. And when Khuzā and their allies entered Makkah, they found something terrifying. The Kaaba was still there, the valley was still there, but the water was gone. People searched, they looked near the sanctuary, they questioned the elders, they examined the ground, they searched the places where water might have flowed. But Zamzam had disappeared. For the first time in generations, Makkah had lost the spring that made life possible. The sacred valley stood thirsty. And the people faced a frightening question. Could Makkah survive without Zamzam? Some may have thought the city was finished. Without reliable water, the desert does not forgive. Pilgrims could stop coming. Caravans could choose another route. The markets could die. The valley could return to silence. But others understood something deeper. This was still the land chosen by Allah. The Kaaba still stood. And the Lord who had given water to Hajar in the beginning was not absent now. So the people stayed. They survived through nearby wells, rainwater, water brought from surrounding areas, and the continued importance of trade. But something essential had been lost. Zamzam became a memory. At first, elders still spoke about it with certainty. They remembered where it had once flowed. They remembered its sweetness. They remembered the stories passed down from their fathers. But time is powerful. One generation died, then another, then another. The exact location faded, the details blurred. Children grew up hearing of Zamzam as something from the distant past, a blessed water their ancestors had known, but their own eyes had never seen. And slowly, the well of Hajar and Ismail became hidden beneath the dust of history. But this was not the end of the story, because the disappearance of Zamzam created more than a physical thirst. It revealed a spiritual thirst inside Makkah itself. The city had lost its water, and soon it would lose something even greater, its Tawheed. After Jurhum was driven out, Makkah entered a new chapter under the leadership of Quza. The Kaaba remained the heart of the valley. Pilgrims still came, trade still moved, the sacred months still carried importance among the Arabs. But without Zamzam, something felt incomplete. The spring that had once connected the city so visibly to Hajar, Ismail, and Ibrahim was no longer flowing before the people. Its absence became part of the atmosphere of Makkah, a hidden wound beneath the life of the city. The people adapted. They found other ways to bring water. They used smaller wells from surrounding areas. They continued serving pilgrims as best they could. But the disappearance of Zamzam had left behind an important lesson. A sacred gift can remain physically hidden when people forget how to honor it. For a time, Quza managed the city. Among them eventually rose a man remembered in Islamic tradition with deep seriousness, Amr ibn Luhai. His story is one of the most tragic in the history of pre-Islamic Arabia, because he was not remembered simply as a cruel man from the beginning. Reports describe him as influential, generous, and respected by his people. He held authority in Makkah. People trusted his judgment. When he spoke, they listened. And that is what made his mistakes so dangerous. A corrupt man can harm people openly, but a respected man, if misguided, can mislead generations. Amr traveled beyond Arabia into the lands of Seerah, where he encountered people worshiping idols. He saw developed cities, established communities, wealth, structure, and religious practices unfamiliar to the pure way of Ibrahim. When he questioned them, they explained that their idols were intermediaries, objects through which they claimed to seek closeness to Allah. The idea was false, but to Amr, it may have appeared impressive. He saw people who seemed powerful and prosperous. He saw rituals wrapped in confidence. He saw a civilization that looked advanced compared to Arabia, and a dangerous thought entered his mind. Perhaps this is why they are successful. That thought was the beginning of disaster. Because not every practice of a powerful nation is wisdom. Sometimes a civilization can be wealthy and still spiritually lost. Amr returned to Makkah carrying an idol, and eventually the idol Hubal was placed near the Kaaba. From that moment, the spiritual decline of Arabia entered a new stage. The house built by Ibrahim for the worship of Allah alone now stood surrounded by objects that people began calling upon besides Allah. This did not happen all at once. That is how corruption often works. It begins with one compromise, then another. Then people find explanations. Then the next generation no longer sees the problem. Slowly, idols spread across Arabia. Different tribes brought their own objects of devotion. What had once been unthinkable became normal. The sacred house became surrounded by hundreds of idols. The Talbiyah of Ibrahim was altered. The people still claimed to believe in Allah, but they mixed that belief with shirk. saying words that allowed partners beside him. This was the tragedy of Makkah before Islam. The Kaaba still stood. Pilgrimage still existed. People still spoke of Allah. But the purity of Tawheed had been buried in the hearts of many people, just as Zamzam had been buried beneath the earth. And that parallel matters. Zamzam disappeared physically. Tawheed disappeared spiritually. Both would need to be restored. For generations, Makkah continued under changing leadership. Eventually, the descendants of Ismail regained prominence through the rise of Quraysh, the tribe from which Prophet Muhammad would be born. Among Quraysh, one man's name became central to the story of Zamzam's return. Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet. By his time, Zamzam had been lost for centuries. Its exact location was unknown. People had heard stories, but no one could point to the ground and say with certainty, "Here is the well of Hajar." Yet Allah had not forgotten it. One night, Abdul Muttalib saw a dream. In that dream, he was directed toward the place of Zamzam. At first, the instruction was mysterious. Then the dream returned with greater clarity. Again and again, he was guided until the location became known to him. This was the beginning of the rediscovery. But when Abdul Muttalib prepared to dig near the Kaaba, the Quraysh resisted. They questioned him. Why should he dig there? What right did he have to claim this lost well? And if treasure was found, who would own it? For Quraysh, the matter was not only spiritual, it was also political. Control of water meant honor. Control of Zamzam meant prestige. And a rediscovered well beside the Kaaba would reshape leadership in Makkah. Abdul Muttalib stood firm. But at that time, he had only one son to support him. The weakness of his position weighed heavily on him. Reports mention that he made a vow. If Allah blessed him with 10 sons who grew strong enough to defend him, he would sacrifice one of them. That vow would later lead to another powerful episode in the family history of the Prophet. But at this moment, the focus remained on the earth beneath Makkah. Abdul Muttalib began digging. The people watched. Some mocked him, some doubted him. Some waited to see if the old stories were true. And then as the ground opened, signs began to appear. The buried objects of Jurhum were uncovered, treasures remembered in reports, including golden gazelles and weapons linked to the Kaaba. The people realized something extraordinary. Abdul Muttalib had found the lost well. Zamzam had returned. After generations of absence, the water of Hajar and Ismail was brought back into the life of Makkah. Imagine the weight of that moment. For centuries, people had spoken of Zamzam like a legend. Now it was no longer a story. It was flowing again. The well that Jurhum tried to erase had survived beneath the earth until Allah allowed it to be revealed. That moment restored honor to Abdul Muttalib and strengthened the position of his family among Quraysh. The service of Zamzam became one of the noble responsibilities connected to the Kaaba. Pilgrims would once again drink from the water that began with Hajar's struggle. And here, the main lesson becomes clear. No tribe truly owns what Allah has blessed. Jurhum controlled Zamzam, but they could not preserve it through greed. They buried it, but they could not destroy it. Generations forgot it, but Allah did not. When the time came, the well returned. And its return happened through the family line from which the final messenger would soon emerge. That is the deeper beauty of this story. Zamzam began with Ismail. It disappeared through corruption. It returned through Abdul Muttalib. And not long after, from that same blessed lineage, Prophet Muhammad was born in Makkah, the city whose water, sanctuary, and history all pointed back to Ibrahim. The rediscovery of Zamzam was more than an archaeological event. It was a sign that something ancient was awakening again in Makkah. The well had returned. Soon, Tawheed itself would return. Because when Prophet Muhammad came with revelation, he did not bring a new invented religion. He restored the pure message of Ibrahim: worship Allah alone. The idols that had surrounded the Kaaba for generations would eventually fall. Hubal would lose its place. The false gods of Arabia would be removed. And the house built for Allah alone would be purified again. But the story of Zamzam leaves us with a warning. Corruption does not always begin with open rebellion against Allah. Sometimes it begins when people turn sacred service into personal gain, when leadership becomes ownership, when worship becomes business, when honor becomes arrogance, when people benefit from religion but forget the one who gave them that honor. Jurhum was not destroyed in one moment. Their decline was gradual. First came wealth, then control, then arrogance, then injustice, then desecration, then the loss of Zamzam. And this pattern repeats in every age. A person can be given knowledge and still become arrogant. A community can be given honor and still become corrupt. A nation can be given power and still lose its soul. That is why Islamic history is not just about the past. It is a mirror. It asks us what we are doing with the blessings Allah has placed in our hands. Zamzam teaches us that barakah is not protected by wealth, numbers, or control. It is protected by obedience. Hajar had nothing in the desert, but Allah gave her Zamzam. Jurhum had Zamzam, but their corruption led to its disappearance. Abdul Muttalib searched with conviction, and Allah allowed it to return. The same water carried 3 lessons across generations. Trust Allah in hardship. Never exploit what is sacred. And never assume a blessing will remain if gratitude disappears. Today, millions of Muslims still drink Zamzam with love and reverence. They carry it home from Makkah. They give it to family. They remember Hajar's struggle, Ismail's beginning, Ibrahim's legacy, and the mercy of Allah in a valley where survival once seemed impossible. The world tried to bury Zamzam, but what Allah preserves cannot truly be lost. It may disappear from human sight for a time. It may be forgotten by generations. It may be covered by sand, silence, and history. But when Allah wills, the buried becomes visible again. The forgotten becomes remembered, and the dry valley flows once more. That is the story of Zamzam. Not only the story of water, but the story of trust, corruption, loss, and restoration. A reminder that Allah's mercy may be hidden for a time, but it is never absent. If this story moved you, support Islamic conquest by liking the video, sharing it with others, and subscribing for more cinematic journeys through Islamic history. And tell us in the comments, what lesson from the disappearance and return of Zamzam touched you the most?